I have a certain amount of hours that I need to be uninterrupted. There's an excitement when you think you're onto something. I find drawing just doesn't help me as well as just digging into some wet clay. I'm really not looking for total realism. I actually go for a slight bit of caricature because that can sometimes help give more of a sense of being alive. But you still have to remember that it's not just one person doing one thing and one person doing another. I'm going to sit them beside each other and that's going to be it. There needs to be a sense of how it all works together.
Now the orientation of these is going to be crucial.
The opportunity to do Joe and Odell immediately was like, I'm all in. They represent the influence of black musicians on old-time music.
The community they were in on the Orange-Alamance County line, there was a lot of back and forth between white and black musicians. The barriers came down when there was good music. This music was an integral part of community functions, corn shuckings, hog killing, playing for house dances, primarily tobacco. It was a long process, so you had to stay up and stoke the fires, and often you play music when you stayed up. I got drunk and fell off the wagon, old corn liquor was still on dragging, old corn liquor. Old corn liquor was the cause of it all.
I'm depicting them in the early 1990s, so there's not a lot to go by. I had a few photographs. The thing that was the most helpful was looking at old videos of them.
We're gonna play him. What you want?
These guys were primarily dance musicians.
That's all we ever done is play for frolic.
Joe would say the white folks called it square dancing, the black folks called it frolicking, but the music and the dance was the same.
We jumped down there and we played that thing, and that guy was standing there calling. He just standing there calling. And he said it used to sound so good, he cut the buck a time or two himself.
I think a lot of people informally played music within Joe's society growing up, but not that many were at the level of the Thompsons.
Once I make a model, I feel like, okay, this is a thing now. This is going to happen. If you can visualize this in a huge scale, this is what it's going to look like. I think part of the scarcity of brick sculptors is that it's really important to be in an area where there's clay. Not all the geological regions of the world are as old as this. This region of the country is part of the tectonic plate shift that created the Blue Ridge Mountains. Structures that have been worn down over the years. We're in this dumping ground for the sediment of the mountains as they eroded. And that's where the clay comes from. This is a major clay belt in the world that we live in, North and South Carolina. Clay is mined on site or nearby. Sometimes there's things added to it, sometimes shale is added. I have them cut me larger pieces. Instead of a 4x8 chunk of clay, a normal brick, my pieces are 8 inches by 12 inches. It's not an easy material to haul around, and so maybe by the virtue of where I live, has had a lot to do with the medium I work in. If you were carving stone, you'd have a big block of stone, you'd chisel it away. You know, it's a given. You have the material already there. Really, from the ground up, it has to be thought out how the pieces kind of integrate.
This is my sheet where I've calculated my scale. This is 1/6 scale, so it's to measure off of the model and get it right. This is tedious, not my favorite part of the process, but it's vital, that's for sure.
There's principles of masonry that you have to adhere to. And you have to think, okay, how does this relate to the course below it? How is the next course going to work?
This is a good workout. This thing's weigh like 14 pounds or something.
Also, you're trying to make
Oh, that piece would work.
pieces that are not like the rectangular brick. This is pretty much doing it the way that sculpture has been made for thousands of years. I'm kind of doing what the Babylonians did and the Egyptians did, and that's comforting to me. When you're working on sculpture, you're always looking for the edge to see how that flows and to see how it moves into the next form. In order to really check yourself, you look at the edge, then look at a new edge. There's always a new edge. Multiply that by an infinite number, and that's what you're doing when you're sculpting. I guess the earliest work I was looking at it's three-dimensional but shallow relief. So sculpture that was built into buildings that allows you to really tell a story, just like a painting might. Then thought, well, why can't I push this out of the wall and make this more of a three-dimensional image? It's something that I've become associated with.
And trying to do people, some of it's kind of like detective work. You're looking at pictures, but you look for certain features that are consistent no matter how old you are.
There's just a few features on your face. So the subtleties that make people unique is just incredible.
Odell, Joe's cousin,
Hey, how you doing?
who was more of a guitar player and a fiddler back in the day,
If you're making a note, you can either push it or pull it. You get the same sound with that bow.
Joe said, my banjo player had moved up to Philadelphia. His brother Nate moved up there after World War II to drive a truck. And so Joe didn't have anybody to play with. And so Odell took up the banjo. Him and Nate played what we call downstroke or claw hammer. You hit down on the strings with the nails of this hand to play the melody, and your thumb follows behind on the fifth. They played a very rhythmic banjo style and a very rhythmic fiddle style to go along with the dancing.
There's a certain character that people have when they play, and maybe even a certain kind of personality that you can glean. It appeared to me that Odell was the more playful of the two.
Really hard to make eyes look like they're looking at something and not just a blank stare. I really don't know how you do it. You just keep messing with it. You get into the tedium of the detail, stuff like that, and the banjo, it gets time consuming. But it's also what gives you that sense of reality.
But Joe, he likes to say, Elvis Presley and rock and roll drove our music out. I think what happened was World War II was a great interrupter. Joe served with the engineers in Europe and built bridges, came back and went to work eventually at White Furniture. And so probably for the 50s and 60s and into the mid-70s, they didn't play. The folklorists started coming around. People finally went, oh yeah, there's music around here, I'll bet.
We ain't played none lately, really.
And they started going out and doing some gigs, just the two of them. There weren't a lot of other examples of this tradition. They were literally the last guys standing.
Maybe even what's more important than the work that they created themselves is the way that they've influenced that style of music to continue on.
Since we started off never thinking about let's go play big halls and stuff, we started out going down to see Joe.
We all started going down there as a band and learning all the tunes. You know, it gave us a real living connection to the music.
Joe, as a young boy, saw his dad and his uncle playing at the square dances.
He just make a fiddle whistle like a cat.
He wanted to play the fiddle.
See, my daddy let me how to play a fiddle.
And he always said that the fiddle hung up on the wall, a little bit high up there, but he always seemed to be able to reach it.
So it's reverse psychology. I'm gonna hang the fiddle here on the wall. But I don't want you messing with that fiddle. You don't touch it. But I'm gonna be gone, and there's the fiddle, and it's tuned up, and the bow's over here, but don't you mess with that fiddle. Well, what's the first thing Joe does? He gets up on the chair and gets the fiddle down and starts to mess with it. And this is often the way people learn. He had heard the tune since he was small. He had watched the way his father moved his hands. So eventually he got a half-size fiddle.
And so he only had 2 strings on it.
Nate was like, well, you ain't got no strings on that thing. It's missing 2 strings.
I'm gonna get Daddy to give me some strings.
Papa ain't gonna get you.
Papa ain't gonna get you no strings.
Joe says, I'll show you what I'll do. Forced his way into the tractor shed, got a pair of pliers, pulled 2 strands out of the screen door and put it on the fiddle.
And then he started playing one of the tunes that his dad played, which was Hook and Line.
You get a line, I'll get a pole, meet me at the crawdad hole. So that's how his career started. He used to say that him and Nate replaced his dad playing for the house dances. They would sit in a straight back chair and their feet wouldn't touch the floor. They were so small. I think that Nate was 7 and Joe was 6 or something like that. And they were young. But if you could keep the beat.
Change tune for just a little bit. Go bear with us.
At the end, when you're trying to really tighten up the finest details,
You're only looking at small areas as you're moving it. You're not working the whole thing anymore. Like you're looking at, an image of the moon, phases of the moon or something, where the light's hitting it as you go around. You can't have flat spots or it stops the eye.
I think you're making thousands of decisions all the time that aren't thinking about it. The subconscious flow is more important than anything else, and you're connecting. You're tapping into a lot of things, and one of them is you're tapping into experience. because you've been there before, you resolved it in some way, that's all there. It's all stored there. It gets, you can get obsessed with this kind of thing, but that's what you end up doing in order to make something as seemingly inanimate as brick turn into something that feels alive. At some point, you finally have to just give it up. The firing takes, I think, a little over a day. At the end of the process, they have a burst of sawdust into the kiln at the very end. It kind of explodes, and the flash tends to accentuate those textures, and it gives you a range of color. It's all about telling a story of people who are substantially important to their art form and to that community and to North Carolina music tradition. This is another chapter of their life. This is going in the community park in Mebane. You do it in the studio and you're doing it with your lighting, and in this case I was doing one at a time. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know what it's going to look like in the lighting, in the space, in the surrounding.
Banjo piece.
So it's exciting to see it for the first time, because that's really what it feels like. Don't know what they were going to look like together. It has to be that interaction. This whole idea of knee to knee, a lot of times when they played, they actually faced each other. One knee would be in between the two knees of the other, and so they could nudge when it was time to make the change in the song. And in particular with square dances, where the song might go on and on for quite a while, it's important to have signals, and that's the way they did it. It denotes that idea about being close together, having actual physical communication. That's a big part of that kind of music. That was their code.
If you're playing fiddle and banjo music, you better be knee to knee. You got to be close together to catch the nuance. When you're just two instruments, you're interlocked, and that's the most exciting thing. It's not in the number of notes you play, it's in the experience that comes out in the music and the history of it. As Joe says, it's in the heart that comes out. You hear it all when they play.
This is about individuals whose lives are intertwined with the history of Mebane.
It's finished. It's finished. We're made out of bricks.
Donut's got a donut.
That's
Donut.
my coon dog.
Oh yeah, donut. Okay.
Donut got a rambling mind.
Oh, I'd like to hear that.
We'll play it for you next
All
time.
right. All right. Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much for coming over.
I enjoyed you.